Missouri, and elsewhere. I'm pleased today to have Nicholas Marks, Senior Technical Director at Continental Cement, Kevin O'Brien, Director of Illinois Sustainable Technology Center, Hadis Ali, Capture Project Manager at Illinois Sustainable Technology Center, and Patrice Logan, Program Consultant at Great Plains Institute. I do know inside the room there's a little bit of echo reverberation, doing our best to address that. But if there's any consolation, the folks online don't hear it. So,
well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. So thanks for having us. Presentation is on its way. My name is Nicholas Marks. I'm the Senior Technical Director for Continental Cement. So my portion is I'm just going to share a little bit about what the cement industry's outlook is on carbon capture, what our plan is, and what we need to happen for that to be relevant. So just a little bit about Continental Cement. Most people haven't heard of us, right? So there are about 4 or 5 different cement manufacturers in Missouri, which is pretty unique. So we're talking about cement just to make sure we're on the same page. Let's go see how you put it back of quick creek. You're going to put your fence in, you open it up, the great powder comes out, right? That's what we do. We make just the cement, just the powder itself. We still have some big bulk ready-mix concrete producers, concrete product producers, and then make product, right? So we're making just the powder. But as you'll see some pictures, very energy intensive, large scale equipment is required for that. Continental Cement is owned by some of the materials companies, some of the materials in publicly traded building materials company. You've probably seen companies around the U.S., right? Here in Kansas City, we have Tornado, which is what you call Ham, is also close to us. And we have Conag out of Columbia. So these are some of the material companies. They keep their local brand as we're part of the time. Continental Cement is the only cement company. We're headquarters in St. Louis out of Chesterfield. We have 2 manufacturing plants. One's in Hannibal, Missouri, and one's in Davenport, Iowa. We ship the Mississippi River system, so we have terminals up in St. Minneapolis, St. Paul, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Iowa, all the way down with 3 terminals in Louisiana and 1 in Memphis. Most of our product goes up in the barge with a little bit by rail as well. So our Davenport, Iowa plant, built in the 60s, upgraded in the 80s, even though the 80s was 40 years ago. The technology was still pretty advanced. So when we look at what's the best technology available, that plant's still here. It's about 1.2 million tons of cement. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. It's something required in 2015. And then our Hannibal plant, Missouri, that plant's been in operation over 100 years, which is pretty impressive. It's gone through a couple of different iterations. One in the 60s, one when I think it had 6 wet kilns. And the most recent was 2008. So we're now underground mining that facility as well. Also 1.2 million tons. You can see from the footprint itself, very large plants and take a lot of energy, which we'll talk a little bit about. We also have a subsidiary called Green America Recycling. So most of our plants were built, most of them use coal, petcoke, and natural gas, right? And use oil to make cement. So probably back in the 90s, we were transitioning to use alternative fuels. So these were byproducts that were going landfill, couldn't be used other industries. We burn those, right? And there's really 2 solutions for that. One is to go to landfill for 1, 2 go to incinerator, or 3 go to cement, right? Really the difference between us and incinerators just burns it off. We're basically burning it to make a product, so that's really advantage. So we take all kinds of different ones. What's interesting about our Missouri plant, Missouri is it has this waste facility. So we take hazardous waste, so these can be byproducts of chemical industries, paint thinners, polyethylene, so all the kind of scraps that come out. They're put into drum essential plants and processed into liquids and soft ingredients. Another interesting thing that applies to a lot of discussion is windmill blades. So last year we did 2 different trials at our plants when we started burning windmill blades. Right, a lot of windmills going up. What happens to them when the blades are done? Right? I mean, I think lifespan is like 10 or 15 years of the blade, but now we're seeing where they're being replaced early, right? Because more efficient design blades are being placed. So we can take them and burn plants, make cement, and they replace coal pit. So We also use alternative raw materials, so these can be block branches, line waste, and other plants. We're doing that and replacing raw materials. So those replace kit of clay, shale, same materials that we typically use in plants. So we worked for the last 2 years with Portland Cement Association. So this is the Association for all cement producers in the U.S. on a carbon roadmap. Right? So we were collaborating on this. And when it was released last October, we signed off. That's right. And really, the carbon roadmap looks at two things, right? One is how do we get to carbon neutral in concrete by 2050, which is pretty ambitious. And it's important to note that, right? Concrete is essential. It's just like energy. It's essential to our development, right? Whether it's economic development, infrastructure, you have to have concrete, right? So when we look at how much CO2 we make and how do we reduce that, there is not an option to get rid of it. You just have to find new ways. So there's really kind of 5 different parts of the PCA roadmap. We do look at the value chain all the way through concrete. And so we're not looking at cement itself. We're looking at concrete. So clinker is basically what we make. We take limestone from the ground, we put some other materials, clay, sand, silt, aluminum. We grind those, we burn them in the kiln to about 2,000 degrees Celsius. What comes out is clinker, black nodules. That's basically the clinker. About 70% of our energy consumption takes part in clinker. Okay. We take that, we add some gypsum, some limestone, and we make cement. So there are 2 different parts there. Then we look at construction, concrete, and the last is carbon capture, which we'll talk about today. But it's important to see the different parts of the roadmap. I will point out 3 different parts. One is on clinker. If we look back in the cement industry, I would say we've probably spent the last 40 years working on clinker. Right? So how do we reduce how much energy it takes, right? Electrical energy and thermal energy to produce clinker, right? A lot of work has been done, a lot of success. Most of that was driven by making plants more efficient, right? Building modern plants, upgrading technologies. And you can see a lot of success happen at those. So we basically run very efficient systems now in our plants. If you compare this to probably the 80s, we use about half the thermal energy today that we used to make cement. So a lot of improvements have been made. The next piece that we've really been working on in the last, I would say, 4 years, and we've seen it just accelerate rapidly in the last 2, is on cement, right? So if we can find a way to make lower CO2, lower potential in cement, we can maybe skip some of that concrete process. So the big shift here was on Portland limestone cements. You may or not heard about those, but that's where a lot of work has been done. Portland limestone cements basically are the cement that's used today. We're just adding a little bit extra limestone. But when we have the limestone, we skip all the other part, right? We skip the clinker, the thermal energy, the extra grinding. And by doing so, we get about a 10% global warming reduction. Right? What's important about PLCs is they are the single largest replacement for type 1-2 cement. So they can be used in the application. So bridges, roads, buildings, soil stabilization. So these aren't niche markets, right? They're not specialized cements. They aren't general use cements, right? So, Brett announced that our Iowa plant is fully converted to PLC production. We're not making type 1-2 cement anymore. And our Missouri plant will be switched sometime this summer. Right? So these are big transitions. Just to give you some context, if you go back to 2019, the U.S. had swapped out all the type 1-2 cement and used PLCs in their place to save about 8 million tons of CO2. Right? So to give you some context, what 8 million tons? In the cement industry, for every pound of cement that we make about 0.9 pounds of CO2. It's almost 1 for 1. So when we talk about 8 million tons of CO2, that's about 8 cement plants worth, right? Just by swapping this out. The 10% doesn't sound a lot. When you look at how much cement and concrete is consumed in the U.S., it becomes a very important factor. So we're proud to be a part of that and to help in that shift. The last piece is carbonation, right? So the other 2 is construction. Basically, just to give the highlight of that is, are we making concrete the right application, right? Sometimes you need 4,000 PSI concrete for a parking deck or a bridge deck. Do you need that for a slide deck, right? Lots of over-designed that. A lot of times we want 4,000 PSI 28 days and people are needing 7 days, right? Which means you're putting too much in. So that's really what that piece focuses on. The last piece is construction, right? Can you make concrete be smaller, stronger, less than that? You look at life cycle analysis, what construction techniques can do. So those are two pieces of massive carbon capture. So you remember we make about a pound of CO2 per pound of cement, roughly. About 40% of that CO2 comes from thermal energy, the burning coal, petcoke. So when we go back to the Green America, these fuels that we use, we can work on reducing that 40%. But at the end of the day, there's still that 60% that comes from just basically decalcined limestone and making cement. We really can't get rid of that. That's why the cement industry is known as a hard-to-abate industry. It's really, it's very difficult for us. So in the end, once we do all these different things, whatever CO2 is left, the business has a great way to capture it, and we either utilize that process or we store it. Right? And that's really what so just a couple of highlights, right? What are the challenges when we look at this, right? One is there is no large-scale commercial plants in the cement plant U.S. today, right? So there's a lot of studies being on. There's some pilot projects. They're taking out some CO2, but there's no large-scale project, right? So it's not like, cement producer A has one that we can go and say, yeah, I want that in my cement plant, and do that, right? And I'll let the others talk about the details behind that. But there is a lot of research being done for that to happen. The second thing is, and there's a lot more into this, but the two important things for this group, right, is one is there's a significant investment that will have to be made in electrical infrastructure for us to capture carbon. Right? You look at what's required for these units. In most cases, the estimates are the electrical consumption in cement plant and double. And so you take out how much electricity we're using today, it would take almost the same amount to capture the carbon and get it where it can be. Right? So that's a pretty significant investment to talk about how much electricity is needed. And the last one is this: once you capture it, you have to do something with it. Right? The best option is to store it underground, but that's still because you need infrastructure in place, right? The pipeline to get there and some way to transport it. And these are all important pieces. And really, what we're seeing now is, most likely there's not going to be a federal regulation around this. Most of it will be state by state. And I guess there's two important pieces that we see, right? One is to make sure that we understand that as the technology, and it is rapidly advancing, right? There are many different technologies available, but as those advance, do we have the infrastructure behind them? Do we have the regulatory policy in place, right? Because if we get the technology there, and the policies aren't in place, they have to hold up taking advantage of this, right? So those are the important key pieces, right? So where do we go from here, right? So one is looking at the technology. I would say for the press release that I've seen, including ourselves, some plant Missouri is looking at carbon capture in some capacity, right? Looking at the pilot projects at the plant, sort of doing complete feed studies, doing this for, and which technology we use, right? There's a lot of different technologies available. Most of those work, we've seen it and demonstrated. But which ones do you use? The other one is really a collaboration between the regulators, the technology partners, and the industry, right, to make sure that we're moving all of those pieces together. How the projects we talked about. And really with all of those, we can have advancements to a full solution. We see that. But then I'll turn it over to the next one. We can take Q&A.
The opportunity to speak here today and talk about one of my areas of research that I've been working on since actually 1999. I always like to tell people, when you worked in the capture area for this long, I can remember the days when people would say, we really wish that we had projects out there we could get on the lab. Well, that time has come, and it's quite exciting to be a researcher, to be involved in this area. And waiting for it for quite some time. What I'm hoping to do today is share with you kind of, if at all you're thinking about capture, is this a process that we should look at? Give you a little bit of a feel as to what's out there, in particular, a lot of funding from the U.S. Department of Energy, and also share with you kind of some of the steps that you could go through. Nicholas has kind of touched on that in this last slide, and I'm going to expand on that a little bit further. So one of the first things you have to think about, and this is building on the last slide we saw, is first, what technology do I select? And I think it's important to let you know that there's technologies that are well established and there are technologies that are under development. And it's important to know the differences between those two. And one of the metrics that's typically used by the Department of Energy is this technology readiness level, or TRL scale. And that's shown here. One of the key things that when you're looking for is, of course, you want to make sure if you're trying to actually finance a project, you're going to need to be up between that 7 and 9 level in order to have it financeable. So that's one of the key things as compared to something that's down there in the TRL, let's say a 3 or 4 level that typically is still in the ladder. So that's one of the things that one of the first factors that we look at is what is the real TRL for this technology? And that's one of the critical questions. Now, on the bullet points on the left-hand side, the other factor to take a look at is if you're looking for Department of Energy funding, it's important to remember that you always need to provide cost share. So the example that I showed there is, let's say the total project size is $1 million. The typical way this is done, there's $80,000 that would be available from the Department of Energy and $200,000 that would be from a non-federal type of source. So that's important to keep in mind as you put together these projects and these budgets. And typically, when we respond to a funding opportunity announcement through the Department of Energy, they do have to limit. They'll say, for example, there might be $1 million available or $5 million available. So they do give you a fair amount of guidance when you're trying to determine what that budget is going to look like. Now, I wanted to kind of paint this for you. Again, it kind of builds on what Nicholas had previously. The different phases, again, putting on the DOE hat and thinking about how do you typically transition. And usually there's a feasibility phase where you're asking some of those 3 basic questions. And this is what's really important to determine, does it even make sense to move forward with this particular capture project? Then, of course, you get to a pre-FEED stage. And a lot of the DOE projects fall into either the pre-FEED or the FEED stage, where FEED, just so we all are on the same page, is front end engineering and design. And what you see here is now we're really pinning down the economics behind it, what are the regulatory designs for it, also really diving down into the technical barriers. And then that, of course, leads on to the really key study, which is typically a full FEED, where you're really at the stage where you're laying out all the details, and now you're theoretically at the end of that FEED, you're pretty much ready for construction. You have the shovel-ready project, which then you can move on to an actual build operate. And what I'm going to show you is through the Department of Energy, we have a number of different projects that range from both the FEED into the actual build to operate end of things. So a few things about our organization, the Illinois Sustainable Technology, which you see up there. We're actually under the University of Illinois, and you can see it's Prairie Research Institute. Now, the Prairie Research Institute is the largest research institute under the University of Illinois. And you can see there's 5 different, what we refer to as surveys there. First, that we're talking specifically in the capture area. When it comes to doing the capture, that's the sustainable technology segment. Whereas if we're looking at geological storage, that's done by our state geological survey. Needless to say, we work very closely hand in hand because you're not going to do capture unless you can do storage. But in all these projects, there's a number of other considerations. For example, if you're going to do capture, you typically need to increase your water usage. So that involves the Illinois State Water Survey to understand what implications does that have. essentially being able to do climate modeling, being able to look at what the impact is on watershed and so forth. And then, obviously, if you're going to break ground, one of the critical questions is, are there any artifacts that need to be aware of? Our archaeological survey that gets involved in looking at that. Then finally, needless to say, we have the endangered species present, and then we have the natural history survey that will focus on that. So the really neat thing is we'd like to talk about one-stop shop where you can go in for these projects and really address all these features all under the Prairie Research Institute. And as you can imagine, we talk about interacting with your sister survey. That becomes really important as you actually move forward with these larger build operate projects. So one of the things that we really take pride in doing is we love to run these kinds of projects. We put it together, we bring the various partners together. We have a very strong relationship with engineering, procurement, and construction firms, as well as various host studies. That's one of the key things that we do. And that third bullet point, though, is very, very important. And that is people that get involved with these DOE projects realize that there's a lot of regulations from finance end things, as well as actually there's a number of factors involved with foreign nationals, conflict of interest. We are actually set up, we have the infrastructure to do that. And that's why in many of these situations, we wind up being the prime for these projects because, rather than building and having somebody else build that infrastructure, we've got it present. And for example, one of the big things now that's been added is conflict of interest. Well, we have an existing structure for that. So for the prime, then we can bring down partners, and those partners can use our conflict of interest system. The other thing that's really important, that last point, is we consider ourselves technology agnostic. So if you came up and asked me, what's the best capture product, best capture technology, I would tell you, here's who we're working with. And we would talk together to understand what might be the best for your particular site. So we will work with any technology. Obviously, we're going to screen it first to make sure it meets the right TRL level. But we're very open from that perspective. And we take pride in doing that because we look at ourselves as kind of a third party, a neutral third party that doesn't really have a dog in the hunt when it comes to the other technology providers. Other things that we look at is we're the main contact with the DOE, very critical from a regulatory perspective because, again, we understand how to do that. We have a lot of experience managing large DOE projects. I'm going to go through some examples of that. We've also put together, I have a whole team that's involved in putting together these proposals. And they're really quite the lengthy deal. These projects, these proposals are typically well over 100 pages. We will do that no charge. We're going to maintain a project to be on time within budget. We know the DOE very well. And of course, the last bullet point, which I'll be showing you, I'd like to talk about quite a bit, is that we have a very strong win record when it comes to these proposals and a very strong relationship with the DOE. We know them very well, and I think they really respect the work that we've done. A lot of people ask, well, what do you do besides the project management? Well, there's a list of all the factors that we get involved in, because when you do these DOE projects, certainly engineering is very important, but more and more, there's more factors that are added that they want you to look at. And obviously, you can see not only economic factors, but now environmental justice, workforce readiness. One of the points that was brought up before is in all these projects, you have to have something to do with the CO2, because just capturing it isn't good enough. And of course, with our relationship with our geological survey, we have a very strong idea of where that is going to, how you're going to transport the CO2 and where it's going to be geologically stored as well. So all factors to make these to be very successful projects. Here's Just a quick snapshot of where we are today. The ones in red are complete projects. The one in blue are projects that we've been awarded. Those last three blue ones, literally, we were awarded last week. So very excited about that. And you can see, as you kind of take a look at it, we do both small pilots, large pilots. We're doing a number of large feeds. You can see some work in the energy storage area. We've also been involved. We have obviously some very early stage work looking at materials, and we look at direct air capture as well as the full traditional capture off of the planes. So it's exciting that we have this wide range of projects. Some of them are within the power generation sector, some are also in the industrial sector. And I'm going to pick just a few of those and highlight that just to give you a feel for how those work. And these are the four that I'm just going to briefly talk about. The first one is what's the largest capture pilot in the world. That's a $67 million project where there's $47 million being provided by the Department of Energy, and then the cost share of $20 million from the state of Illinois for that. The second one is this next generation, or we call it the 21st century power plant. That's a $25 million project that has a whole bunch of features built in, where it's not just capture, it's energy storage, it's utilizing the CO2 to grow algae, and a whole new system. This is what we're doing in conjunction with DUSA. The third one there is the largest capture feed in the world. That was 816 megawatts. It was half of the power plant. We're wrapping that up within the next 2 months. And then the last one, talking about cement, is a project which is just starting up now that we're going to be looking at some of the single kilns. I'm going to go kind of quickly through here just to kind of give you an idea. This is the one that I talked about, City Water Lake Power, where you can see some of the columns. This is a sulfur-based system linked to the ASF. Another interesting one where we work on one side of the plant. On the other side of the plant, we're actually looking at putting in the 21st century power plant, which is the new system that we utilize energy storage and algae. This is a design of that. Again, we're using the same BASF solvent-based system to be able to have good synergy with the other end of the plant. This is the largest feed study in the world at Prairie State. That's based on the Mitsubishi solvent-based capture system. The green is where the facility has actually been put down. We had to do a fair amount of planting. In fact, also you can see the blue where we're looking at putting in place a make-up water storage pond. And this one, which will be the last one, I'm just going to briefly flip through. This is using the air liquide cryo capture technology. This is off the Wholesome facility down in St. Genevieve. This is an interesting one because we're looking at capturing, and then you would transport that over to actually the Prairie State facility and do the geological storage over there. So wish I could talk a little bit more. I could do an entire talk on any one of those projects, but I wanted to just give you a feel for overall what we're doing. So my last comment I wanted to give, acknowledge all the, we really appreciate, couldn't do this without the Department of Energy, National Energy Technology Lab, and all of our various partners there. So I will stop there and turn it over to our next speaker.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Patrice Lallam. I'm a program consultant with the Great Plains Institute. And I'm not sure if my slides are up or not, but if you want to go to slide 2. The Great Plains Institute is an independent NGO that focuses on energy policy and technology, been around for about 25 years. The mission of the organization is to transform the energy system, looking to benefit the economy, the environment, and people. And so I work with the carbon management team at GPI and have been in that role for a number of years. And GPI, we learned a lot. We sort of drilled down into the cement industry with the first presentation and a lot of great information on research and things that are happening relative to technology. We at GPI have been working on carbon management policy for more than 2 decades. We've seen, kind of a rapid trajectory and increase in interest in carbon capture, especially since the reform and expansion of the federal 45Q tax credit in 2018. Our work has grown a lot over the last several years, and for this presentation, we're going to be kind of zooming back up to more of the federal policy landscape, the state of play, and also what's happening in states and regions around the country. At GPI, we facilitate the Federal Carbon Capture Coalition, which is a policy advocacy cohort. There's more than 90 members currently that include labor unions, conservation groups, environmental NGOs, industry representatives. We also host an industrial innovation initiative looking at industrial decarbonization opportunities in cement, for example, across the Mid-Continent region. And then we also facilitate a state carbon capture work group and a regional carbon capture deployment initiative. And those last 2 initiatives have also really seen an uptick in interest and activity. Over the last several years, I think there's approximately 1,000 stakeholders around the country that receive weekly updates from us and are involved in our state and regional work. So as we think about ramping up the carbon management industry, especially on the heels of the infrastructure law that's been mentioned a couple of times today, we really feel like integrated federal and state policies are the keys to success. And as our previous speaker noted, or speakers noted, if you're looking at carbon capture, finding a way to transport that CO2 for either enhanced oil recovery or permanent geologic storage, there are several components that are needed to work together and optimize at the same time to make sure there's project success. So on this slide, you can see that we are working at the federal level, but also working regionally and also at the state level to make sure that the legal and regulatory frameworks and policy incentives are appropriate and in line to ensure that we can achieve economy-wide deployment of carbon management. And now I'll shift a little bit to kind of the federal picture and the US perspective. You've heard about some Missouri-specific projects already. Based on our research, there's more than 20 facilities across the state of Missouri that would be potentially eligible for the Section 45Q tax credit at a federal level. Your state energy plan a few years back referenced carbon capture as a potential pathway in the state. So I'm excited to see this conversation unfolding even more in the state of Missouri. If you look at across the US, we've seen nearly 90 publicly announced projects across the country since the reform of 45Q in 2018. And in 2021 alone, we saw more than 50 announcements of projects. More than 70% of those project announcements are actually in the industrial sector, and cement would be one example of that. So there's a link here on these slides. I hope that participants of this event will have access to the slide deck, but the Clean Air Task Force calculates and maintains a map of all active carbon management projects across the US, including kind of details about the size and scope, the state of play of the technology and all of that with those projects. And as has been referenced, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, went into effect late last year in November. And the over $1 trillion package in total, but significant and actually historic funding was included for carbon management as part of that legislation. And so on this chart, you can see the various priorities and programs that were funded as part of the infrastructure law. And of note, and I'll dig a little bit deeper into this, the SCALE Act, which is really focused on CO2 transport and storage, was funded and included in its entirety in the infrastructure law. And so, this is really an exciting time, and it is kind of all hands on deck as I think we all collectively figure out how to deliver on this infrastructure law and funding, and to make sure that these programs become a reality and actually lead to successful projects. So specific to the SCALE Act, as I mentioned, it really focuses on how we build out regional CO2 transport and storage infrastructure networks. It creates a new DOE loan program that provides low interest loans and grants to finance the infrastructure. It's called SIFIA. It's similar to what is used in water and in other applications at a federal level. There are cost share grants that are included in that legislation, increased funding for the Environmental Protection Agency's underground injection control program for Class 6 wells. And also it provides additional resources to states. So if a state like Missouri is considering seeking primacy over Class 6 wells, for example, they would be eligible to receive a grant or additional resources to help make sure they have the right staff and funding for permitting of those wells and projects. While the infrastructure law included a historic investment in carbon management, there still are several federal policies that we are working to see enacted here still in the 117th Congress. A lot of these topics that you see on the screen were included in discussions and negotiations in the budget reconciliation process. That ceased around the end of the year, and there is some talk that may resume here in the April or May timeline, with perhaps just the climate and energy portion of the reconciliation package moving forward. And so some of the things that we're hoping to see as part of those negotiations, or frankly, any other legislative vehicle that moves between now and the end of the year, would be including an additional extension of the 45Q tax credit, bringing the tax credit through 2031, including direct pay as a way to value the credit so that it can be monetized upfront to help on the investment side of things. And then increased credit values across industry, power, and also for direct air capture. The last bullet also discusses reducing the threshold for eligibility for EGUs, industrial facilities, and also direct air capture. And so through the Carbon Capture Coalition, we continue to monitor all of that very closely. And we're hoping to see budget reconciliation legislation move here, hopefully even in April or May. This chart just kind of restates what I previously showed with the investments in carbon management through the infrastructure law. But one thing that I would like to point out is that all of these monies and these programs are being stood up over the next 5 years. And I'm sure most of you in the room are quite familiar with infrastructure and energy systems. And I'm sure all of you will agree, a 5-year window is not a very long time when it comes to energy resource planning and projects and all those kinds of things. And so we have a really significant opportunity here to stand up all of these programs, get the money out the door from DOE, and to get projects moving on the ground. But, again, we just have this 5-year period that this funding is available for. Thinking about the infrastructure law investments and also what we're still working to hopefully see in Congress before it concludes at the end of the year. all of these policy priorities combined could potentially mean a 13-fold scale up of carbon management capacity by 2035, which is incredibly significant, and also preserve and create tens of thousands of high-wage jobs, which I think is important to one and all. Now, drilling down just a little bit into state and regional policy and activity, excuse me, the Great Plains Institute works with several states, 16 states through the State Carbon Capture work group, but we also worked with states at the start of COVID, actually, and 8 states, Kansas, Louisiana, Maryland, Montana, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, and Wyoming are signatories to a CO2 transport infrastructure MOU. And the states that signed this MOU held a learning webinar series throughout 2021, and then at the end of the year produced an action plan related to storage and transport infrastructure for carbon dioxide. They are continuing to work together, and they are looking at offshore storage issues at the moment. They are also looking at ways that states can cooperate across state lines and what might be really needed in the regulatory setting to make sure that things are seamless when it comes to storage and infrastructure. This next slide is busy, but again, I hope that you're able to access the slides after the fact. You know, beyond regional cooperation and that with which we're leading, there are several states that are currently considering legislation that impacts the carbon management realm. More than a dozen states have active legislation right now. You can see a list there on your screen, and there are active links in that slide to the actual legislation. So states like Indiana have set up frameworks for pore space and the storage aspect of things. Other states like West Virginia, Mississippi, all of these states are working together or working with their state legislatures to try to position themselves to take advantage of this growing industry. In fact, I'm flying to Pennsylvania here later today, and their lawmakers are considering a bill to set up their legal and regulatory framework to help stand up the carbon management industry in their states. So at GPI, you know, one of our primary goals is to make sure that state level policymakers, stakeholders, industry leaders all have the right information and tools to think about how best to position their states, their companies, et cetera, to build out this industry. We have a website that's available, carboncaptureready.org. That includes regional analysis and modeling, state level fact sheets, including one for the state of Missouri, detailed primers and other information. We recently announced and shared a new atlas showcasing hydrogen and carbon hub opportunities across the country. So I encourage you to visit that website to learn more. And then if you're up for more conferences and travel, we are hosting a Carbon Management Technologies and Infrastructure Conference in Louisville, Kentucky at the end of May. And so the registration information and list of speakers and all of that is included here in this slide. And then finally, thank you for the opportunity. I would offer my colleague Emma Tomley manages our regional carbon capture deployment initiative mailing list. We send out an update of news coverage across the country and in states, and also a summary of legislative action in states around the country every Friday. And if you're interested in growing that list and being a part of that, please reach out to Emma by email, and she'd be happy to add you. So with that, thank you. And I will turn it back over to the conference hosts.
Thank you, Patrice. Thank you, Nick and Kevin as well. We are running a little long, but I don't want to deprive you of an opportunity to ask any questions. So we'll do, if you have 1 or 2 questions, we can do that. Does anybody have a question for the presenters?
Thank you for that talk. I guess if you could wave one magic wand to remove one regulatory hurdle that stands in the way of this technology, what would that be?
To be honest with you, for us, I mean, we're just getting into this and trying to understand where we are, right? I think here in Missouri specifically, right, when we look at what was talking about the Class 6 wells and privacy, there is no current plan or roadmap to have wells here, right? So that means that we're transporting it somewhere else. But I think that's one thing to consider, right? And how does that play in? Because from a recent call I was on, the state has to get approval and the EPA has to get approval. Right? You have to have both. Right now, there's only 4 states in the U.S. that currently have plans and roadmaps to have Class 6 privacy well. So there's a lot of other pieces, right? There's what's the carbon taxing, all those different things. But we look specifically at this. I mean, the technologies are there today. We need to catch them. Right? People have proven that. But even those technologies, what do you do? Right? And that, looking at the plans, that's a big problem. Right? We have to have someone to go to in order to make the investment in the country. So from our side,
I'm glad I had you go first, because that's exactly what I've heard. Number one, because we're actually involved, both myself and our colleagues on the Geological Survey, on an Illinois task force to look at what needs to be done. And the whole privacy Class 6 wells is an important thing that's being worked through. There's no doubt about it. I will add one other thing that I hear from people that we work with, and that is related to 45Q. Maybe you all have heard the same thing, is, as you know, there's a push to increase that from roughly the $50 level up to an $80 to $85 level. And what we're being told is that legislation is key to be able to really make these larger projects pencil in. So I would concur with the comment about the Class 6 wells and privacy, but would also add what we are constantly hearing is an increase in 45Q is really critical to be able. It's not a regulatory thing, but it's a financial thing to be able to move these things forward. So.
And I guess I would just clean up by saying that I think, from a regulatory side of things, I think that state readiness and state understanding of what they need to do to position themselves is key here. And I would also echo the last speaker. I think enhancements to 45Q, some more certainty there, direct pay so that the tax credit can be more easily monetized, and the extension out to 2031 would be really, really helpful.
Thank you very much. If you all can join me in thanking Patrice, Nicholas, and Kevin. Thank you all. We are headed into a break prior to our energy storage session.